The intensity of fighting in Pokrovsk has decreased, but the Russians are not abandoning their plans to occupy the city. As the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi, said on the telethon broadcast, Pokrovsk is now a continuous fortified area. According to him, there are several places where the Russians managed to get through the engineering barriers. But the Ukrainian armed forces know exactly where these places are, so the situation is generally under control. Syrskyi noted that there are also plans B and C for all possible developments. However, the enemy is not giving up on their plans for occupation. In the Pokrovsk area, the Russians have concentrated 50,000 troops. This information was also confirmed by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, during a conversation with journalists on November 7th. The enemy's number one goal is to occupy Pokrovsk as soon as possible. This goal remains unchanged. According to our military, there are 314 Russians in the city itself, but the group stationed around the city is very large. In an interview with The Guardian, the head of state stated that the fiercest and most brutal fighting is currently taking place in the Donetsk region. But there, the occupiers have suffered heavy losses and have not achieved success. As military counterintelligence officer, SBU Colonel Roman Chervinsky told Kyiv 24 TV channel, although the Russian occupiers have still not managed to capture Pokrovsk, the enemy has cut off logistics. Therefore, the command must now decide whether to continue the defense with new forces or to withdraw units from the city. We see that Pokrovsk has nevertheless held out. But thanks to flanking attacks and flanking maneuvers, the enemy has still achieved its goal. They have cut off logistics. In fact, our unit is now almost in operational encirclement. At the same time, analysts from the Institute for the Study of War report that the pace of the Russian offensive in and around Pokrovsk has temporarily slowed down. According to the report, there is currently no evidence that Russian forces have launched additional offensives in the Pokrovsk direction as of November 9th. A military intelligence source reported that Russian forces are present in most areas of Pokrovsk but are unable to encircle the city. At the same time, the enemy continues to block the logistical support of the Ukrainian armed forces in Myrnohrad. As of 8 a.m. on November 10th, according to data from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Ukrainian defenders have repelled 97 enemy attacks in the Pokrovsk direction. In the Kostiantynivka direction, the enemy carried out 29 attacks. In the Oleksandrivka direction, the defense forces repelled 27 enemy assaults in the areas of the settlements of Yalta, Ivanivka, Zelenaya Rosha, Oleksandrograd, Novoselivka, Sekneve, Aristopol, Stepne, Rybne, Zlahoda, Verbove, and towards the settlement of Andriivka, Klevtsova. The other directions remain less tense. Over the past day, the losses of the Russian occupation forces amounted to 1,090 personnel. Ukraine's defense forces also neutralized 7 tanks, 7 armored combat vehicles, 9 artillery systems, and 57 UAVs. Explosions have once again rocked the port of Tuapse in Russia's Krasnodar Krai. On the night of November 10th, a fire broke out there after a sea drone attack. Osin Pavlik Gorbuz reported a likely hit near berth 167. Meanwhile, the operational headquarters of the Krasnodar Krai administration claimed the attack was allegedly neutralized. In the
waters of the Black Sea, in the Tuapse area, 4 USVs were neutralized. One of the unmanned boats detonated near the shoreline. The shockwave damaged the windows on the second floor of a 2-story house, as well as a garage and a boathouse.
This is the second attack on the port in recent times. On the night of November 2nd, Tuapse was already attacked by drones. As a result of the attack, a tanker and an oil terminal were damaged. According to OSINT analysts, at least 3 sources of fire were recorded at that time. Drones are attacking the port of Tuapse because it is one of the key hubs for the export of Russian oil and petroleum products. The night of November 10th was also restless in Russia's Rostov region. There, drones attacked an oil refinery and a railway station. And on November 9th in Taganrog, Rostov region, a transformer caught fire at an electrical substation. According to eyewitnesses, 2 explosions were heard in the city.
Something exploded here. There was a double explosion. Smoke everywhere, look, it's just crazy.
The company Rossetti reported that as a result of the incident, a high-voltage line was shut down in an emergency. In several districts of the city, the power supply was cut off, as reported by Taganrog residents in local Telegram channels.
When will the power be back? No one warned us anywhere that there would be a shutdown. They say the whole city is without power. At the very least, there's no power on Svobody Street and on Turgenevsky.
Attacks on Russia's energy facilities are becoming more and more frequent. For example, on the night of November 9th, the Voronezh CHPP-1 in the Russian city of Voronezh was attacked. Over there.
There was a big flash.
4 strikes, I think. No, well, I heard 3 strikes, actually. I could be wrong, but that's what I heard.
Voronezh CHPP-1 is an important supplier of thermal energy for residential buildings and major enterprises in the city. The station supplies thermal energy to 4 districts of Voronezh, Levoberezhny, Zheleznodorozhny, Leninsky, and Centralny, as well as to more than 1,000 enterprises, including the largest plant in Voronezh, Voronezh Synthos Caoutchouc. Recently, there have been significant electricity problems in the Russian city of Belgorod. On the evening of November 8th, the governor of Belgorod Oblast, Vyacheslav Gladkov, reported that more than 20,000 people were left without power in Belgorod and the region as a result of the attack. The Luch CHP plant was attacked there, which supplies electricity both to Belgorod and the surrounding area. On the morning of November 9th, the situation remained unchanged. As Gladkov reported, the missile strike caused serious damage to the system, to both the power supply and heating supply.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky believes that Russia may open a second front against another European country before the war in Ukraine ends. The Ukrainian leader stated this in an interview with The Guardian. Zelensky noted that the Kremlin is waging a hybrid war against Europe and is testing NATO's red lines.
I believe that.
That's what I think. Putin can do this. We need to forget about the general European skepticism that Putin first wants to occupy Ukraine and only then might go somewhere else. He can do both things at the same time.
The president of Ukraine linked the increase in criminal activity across Europe, including drone incursions into the airspace of EU countries, to the fact that Russia was unable to achieve significant progress on the front lines in the first months after the full-scale invasion in 2022.
All of this is a test.
All of this is a test. Tests for Europe, tests of their response. All these drone attacks by Putin, what are they capable of? A test to see how America will respond to threats against countries that are in NATO. These tests are dangerous for the integrity of Europe. Putin is in a dead-end situation in terms of real success. For him, it's more of a stalemate.
Zelensky noted that just in October of this year, the Russian Federation lost 25,000 soldiers killed and wounded at the front. According to him, Russia concentrated 170,000 troops near Pokrovsk, but without success.
And there is no success there.
There is no success and there are many casualties.
President Volodymyr Zelensky, in an interview with The Guardian, also stated that he is not afraid of Donald Trump, unlike other Western leaders, and denied reports of an allegedly tense meeting in Washington, emphasizing that he has normal businesslike and constructive relations with the US president.
Everyone is afraid of Trump.
Everyone is afraid of Trump. And that's true. This is the United States, and they are leaders, and I see how many people build their relationships precisely on that. I really want Ukraine to be respected, and we respect the United States.
Zelensky noted that the United States remains Ukraine's strategic partner, possibly for decades or even centuries, and that both sides share common values, unlike Imperial Russia. The president also stated that he intends to order 27 Patriot systems from the United States and called on European countries to temporarily provide their own systems. During this interview at the Mariinsky Palace, the power suddenly went out twice. But after the backup generator kicked in, the electricity was restored.
Electricity.
See, even in the presidential palace.
The president of Ukraine expressed the opinion that the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin is ordering strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, resulting in civilian casualties and leaving people without electricity and water because he cannot break the country's society in any other way.
To create tension.
He cannot create tension in our society by any other means. He understands that we have united the whole country and then all of Europe around us, and breaking that apart is very difficult. He is trying to do just that.
The interview took place in Kiev after massive Russian attacks on the power grid, which left most regions without electricity. Former Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and now Ukraine's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Valery Zaluzhny, stated that Ukraine will not agree to a capitulation disguised as peace agreements. He wrote about this in an article for the New York Post. As Zaluzhny said, Ukraine seeks peace, but a just end to the war would be the restoration of the country's territorial integrity. Punishing Russia for the war crimes committed in Ukraine and obtaining guarantees that no aggressor will ever again threaten Europe from Moscow.
Anything less would be a betrayal not only of Ukrainians, but also of the principles that ensure the security and freedom of the free world.
According to Zaluzhny, Ukraine will continue to fight on the front lines as well as in the political and diplomatic arenas to ensure justice and security.
Our strength lies not only in our soldiers, but also in the clarity of our goal. Peace through victory, not illusion.
Earlier, Zaluzhny stated that the war unleashed by Russia could very soon spread to other territories. The former commander-in-chief believes that the ideas and theories on which the concept of world order was based collapsed after the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated in an interview with The Guardian that the Russian Federation could open a second front against another European country before the war in Ukraine ends.
That's what I believe. Putin could do that. We need to forget about the general European skepticism that Putin first wants to occupy Ukraine and only then might go somewhere else. He can do both things at the same time.
Zelensky noted that the Kremlin is waging a hybrid war against Europe and is testing NATO's red lines.
All of this is a test. All of this is a test. Tests for Europe, tests of their response. All these drone attacks by Putin, what are they capable of? It's a test to see how America will respond to threats against countries that are in NATO. These tests are dangerous for the integrity of Europe.
The president of Ukraine linked the increase in criminal activity across Europe, including drone incursions into the airspace of EU countries, to the fact that Russia has failed to achieve significant progress on the front in Ukraine. In the Pokrovsk area, the Russians are conducting a strategic offensive operation. They have amassed a huge number of troops to gain an advantage and break through the Ukrainian defenses. Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Syrskyi, spoke about this to the New Post. The Commander-in-Chief emphasized that Kyiv is holding firmly onto this logistically important city.
The situation on the front line is indeed tense. The enemy is conducting a strategic offensive operation. They have concentrated most of their forces, creating an advantage in an attempt to break through our defensive line and capture this area.
Syrskyi refuted the claims of Russian propagandists that Pokrovsk has fallen and that Ukrainian troops are surrounded. After the September counteroffensive, which cost the occupiers about 13,000 casualties and allowed Ukrainian forces to clear more than 165 square miles, everything is happening in reverse.
They continue to show this territory on their maps as if it is under their control. But this claim that the enemy has captured almost everything and is about to finish the job does not correspond to reality.
The New Post notes that out of approximately 700,000 Russian servicemen present in Ukraine, Moscow has sent about 150,000 to Pokrovsk. Powerful mechanized groups and 4 Marine brigades have also been involved in the offensive. Syrskyi said that Russia's goal is to encircle Pokrovsk and neighboring towns from the north, south, and east, cutting off supply lines and forcing the remaining population to leave, after which they would carry out the final maneuver to capture the entire Donetsk region. Syrskyi also stated that the defense forces are trying to inflict as many losses as possible on the occupiers.
Our task is to ensure that the level of mobilization of people will be equal to or less than the number of losses they suffer. For 2 months now, they have been carrying out these active assault operations without any material success.
The commander-in-chief explained that Ukraine aims to destroy enemy sites from which drones and command centers are launched, and this requires good intelligence and high-precision long-range munitions.
Our artillery is forced to strike deep behind enemy lines at great distances, which is why the importance of missiles is increasing.
Meanwhile, Russian propaganda telegram channels have circulated a video showing the occupiers taking advantage of bad weather, trying to enter Pokrovsk on motorcycles, on foot, and in battered cars.
Russian occupiers have broken through into Pokrovsk. There are already several hundred of them in the city, according to the 7th Air Assault Corps. The enemy has become more active on the southern outskirts and is advancing using light vehicles. The report states,
to achieve this, the enemy took advantage of unfavorable weather conditions, particularly dense fog. This reduces the effectiveness of our aerial reconnaissance and our ability to strike targets in open areas. According to
Ukrainian military reports, there are now more than 300 occupiers in Pokrovsk. They are trying to reach the northern boundaries of the city in order to completely encircle the agglomeration. Ukrainian forces are doing everything possible to destroy the enemy and hold their positions. Since the beginning of November alone, the defense forces have eliminated 162 Russians in Pokrovsk and wounded another 39. At the same time, videos have appeared online showing the occupiers complaining about the lack of water and food. I don't
know. What should we do? The radio is dead. No communication, nothing. There was no food for a while. Nothing. 5. Come on.
In another video, you can see exhausted Russians hiding in a grove. As CNN reports, in recent days, the fighting in the city has sharply intensified after Russian units broke through the Ukrainian defenses and entered Pokrovsk. Despite the fact that Pokrovsk has lost its strategic importance as a transport hub, the city has become a symbolic target and a matter of prestige for Putin. He has repeatedly mentioned it as part of his statements about the so-called liberation of Donbas, so the fall of the city would be an important political signal within Russia. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Syrskyi, said that the intensity of fighting in Pokrovsk has indeed decreased, but this does not mean that the Russians have abandoned their plans to occupy the city. The Ukrainian command has plans in place for various possible developments of the situation. A Turkish C-130 military transport aircraft has crashed on the border between Georgia and Azerbaijan. This was reported by the Turkish Ministry of Defense. Search and rescue operations are being carried out jointly with the authorities of Azerbaijan and Georgia, reports Anadolu Agency. According to the Turkish Ministry of Defense, there were 20 Turkish armed forces personnel on board, including crew members. According to TV reports, the 4-engine C-130 Hercules military transport aircraft belonging to the Turkish Air Force took off from Ganja Airport in Azerbaijan. At the time of the crash, it was flying at an altitude of about 8 kilometers. According to Gaza, the Turkish military aircraft disappeared from the radar of Georgia's air navigation service a few minutes after entering Georgian airspace without sending a distress signal. According to the service's statement, communication with the aircraft was suddenly lost, and immediately after the incident, search and rescue operations were launched in accordance with established protocols. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev called Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in connection with the crash of the Turkish military cargo plane. He expressed his deepest condolences to the President of the Republic of Turkey, as well as to the families and loved ones of the fallen servicemen. The President of the Republic of Turkey thanked the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan for the phone call and condolences. During the phone conversation, it was noted that the relevant state authorities of Azerbaijan and Turkey are in contact regarding the crash. Recently, warm relations have been developing between Azerbaijan and Turkey. For example, on November 8th, the Turkish leader came to Baku to attend a military parade with Aliyev on the occasion of the second anniversary of the victory in the Karabakh War. A battalion from the ceremonial regiment of the Turkish Presidential Guard also took part in the parade. At the conclusion of the parade, Azerbaijani drones and Turkish Air Force F-16 fighter jets flew over the city.
The FSB of Russia stated that the organization Bellingcat, together with Ukraine and Britain, allegedly planned to hijack a Russian MiG-31 with a Kinzhal missile on board.
Earlier this year, I received an unexpected email message in which an unknown individual, whose identity was not revealed, proposed to hijack a military aircraft.
It is claimed that Ukrainian intelligence allegedly tried to recruit Russian pilots and offered them up to $3 million to hijack a supersonic fighter jet and deliver it to a NATO base in Romania. There, supposedly, it could have been shot down by air defense systems.
They sent me photos and videos showing a large sum of cash, supposedly prepared for me after the hijacking.
The pilots were also allegedly promised foreign citizenship and a better life abroad. As for why the Russian special services created and distributed such a video about their supposed successes, one can only guess. Ukrainian intelligence has demonstrated that it brilliantly plans its operations. Earlier, a Russian pilot flew a Mi-8 helicopter of the Russian armed forces into Ukraine. The pilot said that he took off from the Kursk airfield and headed toward the Kharkiv region. And near the settlement of Shebekino, he flew at an extremely low altitude of 5 to 10 meters, maintaining radio silence. This was a special operation by Ukrainian intelligence that lasted more than 6 months. For their part, the Russians claimed that the flight was caused by navigational errors. On June 1, 2025, the Security Service of Ukraine carried out a special operation called WEB. At that time, 41 Russian aircraft were hit. Among them were mainly strategic bombers. It was reported that drones struck 4 military bases: Belaya, Diaghilevo, Olenia, and Ivanovo. Operation Web was unprecedented in terms of the depth of its impact. Ukrainian drones struck targets at a distance of more than 600 kilometers, covering a third of Russia's territory. The head of the Security Service of Ukraine, Vasyl Malyuk, stated that for Russia, the cost of the strike on its aviation amounted to $7 billion. The Ukrainian Defense Forces struck the Saratov oil refinery, the maritime oil terminal in temporarily occupied Feodosia, and several facilities in the temporarily occupied territory of Donetsk region. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Thus, the strike on the Saratov oil refinery was carried out on November 11th. The facility produces more than 20 types of petroleum products and is involved in meeting the needs of the Russian occupation army.
A series of explosions was recorded, after which a massive fire was observed in the target area. The results of the strikes are being clarified.
Regarding the maritime oil terminal in temporarily occupied Feodosia, the General Staff noted that it is a key hub for supplying fuel and lubricants by sea to the temporarily occupied territories in southern Ukraine. It is known that the tanks on the facility's grounds were hit. The extent of the damage is being clarified. Ukrainian defenders also struck the occupiers' logistics warehouse in Donetsk and a concentration of personnel near Ocheretin.
Strike UAVs reached their target areas. The results are being clarified. The defense forces continue to take all measures to undermine the military and economic potential of the occupiers and force the Russian Federation to cease its armed aggression against Ukraine.
Meanwhile, on November 11th, an airspace restriction regime called Plan Carpet was introduced in Orenburg. The city is under attack by drones.
Drone! Unbelievable.
Earlier, explosions were heard in Tuapse, Russia. Port infrastructure was attacked. The Sun reports that the strikes were carried out with Flamingo cruise missiles.
A fire in Moscow and a real disaster in Krasnogorsk near Moscow caused by the careless demolition of a ski complex. Locals are in shock from the aftermath of the demolition on the ground.
It's like some kind of apocalypse, honestly.
On November 11th, construction materials caught fire at a residential complex site on Ostashkovskaya Street. Residents shared footage showing smoke visible from nearby streets. The flames were quickly extinguished. And these are shots from Krasnogorsk near Moscow. This is the moment of the demolition of the Snezhkom complex, during which cars and windows in nearby houses were damaged. The footage shows a large concrete piece of the structure falling from the top and shattering on the ground. Pieces flew dozens of meters, damaging parked cars and windows in a residential building.
Look, their car got smashed. And here, the trees got knocked down. Right here, a woman with a child in a stroller was almost hit. And here, on the 5th floor, we have neighbors. Their window was shattered.
During the collapse of Snezhkom, a wave of earth and construction debris engulfed a passerby. Judging by the footage, a wall of earth and structural parts fell on the man. He fell onto the road. A 34-year-old resident of the building next to the complex was also injured. She suffered a cut on her nose. In the residential complex located next to the ski center, the strong shaking caused cracks in the walls and tiles inside the apartments.
Here's another crack in the hallway. Some of the tiles even popped out completely, it seemed.
According to local telegram channels, during the demolition of the Snezhkom complex in Krasnogorsk, workers were dropping blocks from above to the ground using a cable. Although in response to earlier complaints from local residents about the demolition, they were told that the complex would be dismantled in a controlled manner. The Russian Investigative Committee reports that a criminal case has been opened due to violations of safety regulations during construction work. The enemy has captured 3 settlements in the Zaporizhzhia region. This was reported by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrskyi. The Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine noted that the enemy is using weather conditions, thick fog, to infiltrate between positions. Ukraine's defense forces continue to operate according to the principle of active defense. The enemy is currently focusing its main efforts in the Pokrovsk direction. But in the Zaporizhzhia region, the enemy has also become more active. The situation has significantly worsened in the Alexandrovsk and Huliapol directions.
Taking advantage of its numerical superiority in manpower and equipment, the enemy advanced during fierce fighting and captured 3 settlements. The soldiers of the South Military Group are engaged in grueling battles for Ravnopoli and Yablokovo.
Also, on the Telegram channel Sniper Plus says, run by the mayor of Henichesk, Stanislav Bunyatov, with the call sign Osman, it is noted that in 2026, the Zaporizhzhia direction could face a collapse from the right flank. Russia may take Pokrovsk. Putin is throwing everything into capturing the city, but he will pay a high price for it. This is the opinion of analysts from the Institute for the Study of War. American analysts note that the Russian military command has decided to conduct several offensive operations simultaneously across the entire theater of military operations, particularly in the Kharkiv region near Vovchansk and Kupiansk, in the northeast of the Donetsk region's fortified belt, and near the border junction of Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions. The Institute for the Study of War notes that the Russian military command has demonstrated its willingness to accept significant losses and the time required for such campaigns. But even such an exhausting tactic does not play into Russia's hands. Foreign Affairs writes that Vladimir Putin is a year behind schedule in capturing Pokrovsk, as he had planned to enter the city by November 2024. Despite their significant numerical advantage, the Russians were unable to quickly break through the Ukrainian armed forces' defenses. Every month, more than 20,000 occupiers are eliminated. According to the Ukrainian armed forces, there are currently more than 300 Russians in Pokrovsk.
On November 12th, the Ukrainian armed forces attacked the Stavrolen defense plant in Budyonovsk, Stavropol Krai, Russian Federation, as well as an ammunition depot in the temporarily occupied Novi Svet, according to the General Staff of the Ukrainian armed forces.
As part of efforts to reduce the production capabilities of petrochemical products for the needs of the Russian aggressor's military-industrial complex, Ukrainian defense forces struck the infrastructure of Stavrolen.
The plant has a full cycle of hydrocarbon raw material processing and produces polymers used in the manufacture of composite materials, body parts, seals, and insulation for various types of equipment used by the Russian Federation's army. Among other things, it also produces components for drones. Stavrolen is a subsidiary of Lukoil. The plant supplies products to local manufacturers and provides raw materials for the petrochemical industry of the Russian Federation. Numerous explosions and a fire were recorded at the site of the impact. It is also known that, in order to reduce the enemy's offensive capabilities, an ammunition depot was struck in the temporarily occupied territory of Novi Svet in the Donetsk region. Earlier, on November 11th, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported that Ukrainian Defense Forces had struck the Saratov oil refinery, the marine oil terminal in temporarily occupied Feodosia in Crimea, and a number of facilities in the temporarily occupied territory of the Donetsk region. The Saratov oil refinery produces more than 20 types of petroleum products and is involved in meeting the needs of the Russian occupation army.
A series of explosions was recorded, after which a massive fire was observed in the target area.
As noted by the General Staff, the marine oil terminal in temporarily occupied Feodosia is a key hub for the supply of fuel and lubricants by sea to the temporarily occupied territories in southern Ukraine. It is known that the tanks on the facility's territory were hit. The strikes reported by the General Staff of Ukraine on November 11th and 12th are of strategic importance and reflect a new phase of pressure on Russian military infrastructure and industry. Earlier, journalist Mike Nakis stated, refineries and oil depots in Russia continue to burn, and recently, so do thermal power plants and electrical substations.
The gasoline crisis is spreading and gaining momentum, and soon an energy crisis may join it. Ukraine is systematically cutting Moscow off from sources of electricity.
Nakis stated that, according to the publication Verstka, oil refineries and oil depots in the Russian Federation have been attacked at least 250 times.
Out of the 250 attacks, 213 or 85% were successful. That is, they resulted in at least the ignition of utility buildings or debris falling on the facility's grounds, and in some cases, explosions and fires at processing units or storage tanks, which halted operations for several days or even weeks. The success of the remaining 37 attacks, 15%, could not be confirmed by Verstka, but they may have achieved their objectives as well.
A number of analysts claim that for Russian society, these strikes serve as a signal that the war is penetrating ever deeper into the country's territory. For the Kremlin, this is a reputational blow, demonstrating the vulnerability of even strategically important industrial sites. Overall, the series of attacks on industrial and energy infrastructure indicates that Ukraine is intensifying its strategic campaign to exhaust Russia's war economy, as previously announced by President Volodymyr Zelensky. The goal is not only the physical destruction of individual facilities, but also the systematic limitation of the production and logistics capabilities on which the Russian military-industrial complex relies. As the president of Ukraine stated, in 2025, Russia will lose at least $37 billion in budget oil and gas revenues.
Russian oil companies and the energy sector as a whole are losing tens of billions of dollars more. All of this restricts the Russian war machine. Both conventional sanctions against Russia and Ukraine's long-range sanctions are working effectively.
For Russia, this means increased costs for defense, recovery, a possible slowdown in weapons production, weakening of the resilience of the rear economy, and growing internal tension, including pressure on the political leadership.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov gave his first interview to Russian media after reports of his removal from office, where he tried to justify his fall from grace.
There's a joke that goes, "Our conscience is clean because we rarely use it." But in this particular case, that's absolutely true.
Earlier, Western publications speculated that the official might have lost his position because of the failed summit between the US and Russian presidents. Lavrov missed a Security Council meeting and, for the first time in several years, was not appointed as the head of the Russian delegation at the G20 summit in Johannesburg. In the interview published on November 11th, Lavrov denies the information reported by the Financial Times. The publication wrote that the talks between Putin and Trump fell through after Lavrov, during a phone conversation, gave U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio a list of Moscow's tough demands for peace terms in Ukraine.
Lavrov and Rubio talked on the phone, and before that, the Russians sent a tough memorandum after receiving which, well, the Americans decided that talking to us was pointless. Just pointless.
Lavrov stated that the memorandum was delivered even before Putin's conversation with Trump. He also denies that his conversation with Rubio was tense, as reported by the Financial Times.
The memorandum that the Financial Times journalists mention is a so-called non-paper, not an official document, just a completely unofficial draft.
In the interview, Lavrov assured that the memorandum handed over to the U.S., as it seemed in Moscow, recorded the agreements reached at the previous meeting between Putin and Trump. And after the conversation with Rubio, according to Lavrov, meetings were supposed to be organized between the foreign policy and military officials of the two countries and, presumably, their intelligence agencies. No matter what Lavrov says, rumors about his resignation have not stopped for an entire week. The wave of gossip is so strong that the Kremlin has had to publicly comment on the situation twice. So, on October 7th, the press secretary of dictator Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Peskov, assured journalists that Lavrov, of course, continues to serve as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and called reports of a possible resignation false. And the day before, the Kremlin spokesperson promised a media appearance by Lavrov.
If they've already written about it, then.
3 identical offices were created for Putin, but they gave themselves away with the details. For many years, the Kremlin concealed Vladimir Putin's real whereabouts by using specially created duplicate offices. As investigative journalists from the project Sistema have discovered, at least 3 identical rooms were set up for the Russian dictator in different parts of Russia, in Novorossiysk, Sochi, and Valdai. The main evidence for the existence of 3 different offices is the door handle, a decorative line on the wall, and a folder for documents. To spot the differences, investigators analyzed dozens of hours of broadcasts from the program, Moscow, Kremlin, Putin, archives from the Kremlin's website, government procurement documents, and building plans. Although the offices look identical, journalists discovered small but telling differences. In the Sochi office, the door handle, ventilation, and seam line on the wall are positioned differently. In the Valdai office, the thermostat and the color of the tabletop differ from the others, and in the Novorossiysk office, it's the original version from 2015. According to journalists' calculations, Putin held about 130 official events in the Valdai office alone, mostly via video link. Since February 2023, the dictator stopped using the Sochi office after fearing attacks from Ukrainian drones. And since 2025, he has also stopped using the office in Novorossiysk. There have also been reports in the media that Putin has body doubles. According to the head of Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, Kirilo Budanov, Putin regularly uses at least 3 body doubles. Recently, journalists exposed 2 of the dictator's doubles. One of them is allowed to speak while the other must remain silent. This conclusion was reached by the publication Bild, which identified the main features by which Putin can be distinguished from his copies. Their facial features, which are difficult to fake, give them away. They differ from the original in the shape of their ears, nose, and other features, as well as in height. The media reported that the real dictator, in order to appear taller, wears handmade shoes with a special elevated heel.
President Volodymyr Zelensky received a report from the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Alaudinov, particularly regarding the plans of the aggressor country, Russia.
Among the matters we can discuss publicly, Kirilo reported on the available information about Russian plans for the first half of next year, as well as on the key aspects of the geopolitical situation surrounding Ukraine. We are monitoring Russian connections in key regions of the world and restricting them.
The president and the head of the main intelligence directorate also discussed military intelligence operations conducted jointly with other forces. The president stated that he had instructed certain measures to be taken in the interests of Ukraine. Earlier, Volodymyr Zelensky held a meeting with the head of the security service of Ukraine, Vasyl Maliuk, during which it was revealed that one of the Oreshniks was eliminated on the territory of the Russian Federation.
Until now, we had not made this public, but we can say one of the 3 Oreshniks was eliminated at Kapustin Yar by the main intelligence directorate, Security Service of Ukraine, and Foreign Intelligence Service.
As Maliuk reported, this was communicated exclusively to the president of Ukraine, and a few presidents of other countries were also aware of it.
The elimination was 100% successful. It was a very successful mission. At that time, the name Oreshnik was not yet used by the general public. And the Russians, if I'm not mistaken, weren't particularly threatened by it back then. This was the summer before last.
The head of the Security Service of Ukraine also reported that since the beginning of the year, Ukraine's defense forces have successfully struck more than 160 oil extraction and oil refining facilities on the territory of the Russian Federation.
If we take September and October of this year alone, that's 20 facilities. This has led to a shortage of more than 20% in the domestic petroleum products market, the idling of 37% of oil refining capacities, as well as shortages of petroleum products in 57 regions of the Russian Federation, and a ban on gasoline exports until the end of this year.
Maliuk added that these are precisely legitimate targets, since 90% of the budget of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation comes from oil extraction and oil refining. As a result, as the president of Ukraine stated on November 12th, Russia will lose $37 billion in budget oil and gas revenues this year. Among the brilliant special operations of the Ukrainian defenders is Web, which was carried out by the SBU on June 1, 2025. At that time, 41 Russian aircraft were hit, mostly strategic bombers. It was reported that drones struck 4 military bases, Belaya, Diaghilevo, Olenya, and Ivanovo. Operation Web was unprecedented in terms of the depth of its impact. Ukrainian drones struck targets at a distance of more than 600 kilometers, covering a third of Russia's territory. The head of the SBU, Vasyl Maliuk, stated that for Russia, the cost of the strike on its aviation amounted to $7 billion. On June 3, 2025, the Security Service of Ukraine carried out a successful underwater attack on the Crimean Bridge, blowing up the structure's supports. This was already the 3rd attack since the start of the full-scale war. Earlier, a Russian pilot flew a Mi-8 helicopter belonging to the armed forces of the Russian Federation over to Ukraine. According to him, he took off from an airfield in Kursk and headed toward the Kharkiv region, flying at a minimum altitude of about 50 meters in radio silence mode. The operation was planned in advance and carried out by Ukrainian intelligence over the course of more than 6 months.
The Russians do not have control over the city of Pokrovsk. This statement was made by the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Alexander Syrskyi. On his Facebook page, he reported that he made a trip to the Pokrovsk direction, where he spoke with commanders. According to him, stabilizing the situation in the area of the Pokrovsk-Mirnored operation depends on the level of coordination between military command bodies, units, and subdivisions involved in carrying out combat missions.
The Pokrovsk direction remains the main focus in the context of the enemy's offensive. This is where the highest number of daily enemy assault actions are recorded. A significant part of its grouping operating on the territory of Ukraine is concentrated here. The enemy, in particular, is trying to take advantage of the difficult weather conditions.
Syrskyi added that the main tasks of the armed forces of Ukraine remain the gradual taking of control over certain areas, supporting and protecting existing logistical routes, as well as organizing additional ones. He said that constant fighting with small enemy assault infantry groups continues both on the approaches and directly within the urban area. Ukrainian soldiers are doing everything possible to make it impossible for the enemy to move and gain a foothold. According to the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, as a result of search and strike operations over the past week, almost 7.5 square kilometers of territory in the Pokrovsk district of Donetsk region have been cleared of enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups. Syrskyi summed up,
"There is no question of Russian forces controlling the city of Pokrovsk or of the Ukrainian Defense Forces grouping being operationally encircled. The fight continues."
The day before, thick fog allowed the occupiers to approach Pokrovsk. A video was published online showing Russian soldiers moving along a foggy road in civilian cars and on motorcycles. According to the BBC, it was filmed on the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. As told by the pilot of the Ukrainian unit Syrskyi with the call sign Goose, this column of occupiers was later partially destroyed. According to him, due to poor weather conditions, there was no video surveillance of the repelled attack, so he is not sure whether the entire group was hit. The soldier emphasized that it was precisely because of the fog that the Russians decided to launch an assault with a column of vehicles, which, in good visibility, could have easily been destroyed by Ukrainian drones. According to the 7th Corps of the Air Assault Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, the massive assault by the invaders using light vehicles on the Selidov-Pokrovsk highway area achieved partial success. Some of the enemy vehicles were destroyed by the defenders on the approaches to Pokrovsk and some more within the city itself. Search and strike operations are ongoing. Defense forces are also working to destroy the firing positions that Russian troops managed to set up in recent days in certain districts of Pokrovsk. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, as of 8 a.m. on November 13th, the situation in the Pokrovsk direction remains the most tense. There, Ukrainian defenders have repelled 81 attacks by the aggressor. The General Staff also published footage of the 425th Separate Assault Regiment, which continues assault operations in Pokrovsk. In total, 226 combat engagements were recorded along the front line over the past day. The losses of the Russian invaders amounted to 1,180 personnel.
Flamingo missiles struck Russia on the night of November 13th. Units of the Ukrainian Defense Forces carried out strikes on several dozen targets on Russian territory and in temporarily occupied areas of Ukraine, using, among other things, drones. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In particular, it is noted that in temporarily occupied Ukrainian Crimea, there were hits on the marine oil terminal storage facility, a helicopter parking area, and a site for storing and preparing UAVs at the Kirovsky airfield, as well as on an air defense radar station in Yevpatoria. In the temporarily occupied territory of the Zaporizhzhia region, an oil depot near Berdyansk was struck, as well as forward command posts of the 5th Combined Arms Army and the 127th Motorized Rifle Division of the Russian occupiers, the statement said. Additionally, as reported by the General Staff, targets were also hit on Russian territory. To carry out complex strikes, attack UAVs, rocket drones, and various types of missiles are being used. Thus, last night, a number of long-range weapons were launched, including domestically developed systems such as Flamingo, Bars, and Lutyi, the General Staff noted. As of today, the Flamingo is, in terms of its characteristics, the best subsonic cruise missile in the world. It surpasses not only the Russian Kh-101, Ka-555s Kalibro and Iskander-K, but also the American Tomahawk. It is superior in terms of target range, warhead weight, and several other parameters. For example, its flight range is 3,000 kilometers, maximum speed is 950 kilometers per hour, and cruising speed is 850 to 900 kilometers per hour. The warhead weight is 1,000 to 1,150 kilograms. The guidance system is combined, including satellite, electronic warfare resistant, and inertial systems. The publication Welt reports that in September, Ukraine used 3 Flamingo cruise missiles during a strike on a Russian intelligence base in temporarily occupied Crimea. According to the publication, 2 missiles hit the target while another fell approximately 100 meters away.
Ukraine and the United States of America are jointly developing interceptor drones capable of countering Russian attack UAVs. This was stated by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in an interview with Bloomberg. According to him, this is a joint American-Ukrainian production. Zelensky expressed hope that in the future the armed forces of Ukraine will have even more drones. The head of state also commented on the difficult situation on the Pokrovsk front. According to him, Russian forces are trying to gain control of the city after months of fierce fighting. The president emphasized that any decision to withdraw troops should be made by the military command on the ground.
No one is forcing them to die for the sake of ruins. I will support our soldiers, especially the commanders who are there, in how they can control the situation. Otherwise, it will be too costly for us. The most important thing for us is our soldiers.
Zelensky noted that Russia is seeking to achieve victory in Pokrovsk in order to create a favorable position in possible negotiations with the United States. At the same time, the Ukrainian leader emphasized that Ukraine will not give up defending its eastern territories.
We cannot leave eastern Ukraine. No one will understand that. People will not understand that. And most importantly, no one can guarantee that, after capturing a particular settlement, they won't move further. There is no deterrent factor.
Volodymyr Zelensky also said that the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin managed to intimidate some European leaders so that they would not send air defense systems to Ukraine. According to him, the Kremlin leader carried out a deliberate campaign against Europe with recent drone and fighter jet incursions into the airspace of NATO member countries.
I think he scared them. That was his goal and he achieved it. The Europeans responded immediately. How did they respond? That's a question for NATO and for each country that faced the aerial threat.
The head of state added that the drone incursions were without a doubt a form of psychological influence. Moreover, Putin was testing not only the reaction of the alliance countries, but also their readiness for such threats. Zelensky also commented on the aggressor country's attacks on Ukraine's energy sector. The president of Ukraine believes that Russian forces are targeting Ukraine's energy system, trying to weaken Ukraine before spring. According to him, the Russians know that as soon as the energy factor disappears, they will have no other strong factors left. Meanwhile, on his Telegram channel, Volodymyr Zelensky wrote that the Kremlin is ramping up production at military-industrial facilities and preparing for a major war on the European continent in 2029 or 2030. He called on European leaders to put even more pressure on Russia.
The US conducted strike drills with a nuclear bomber near Russia's borders. An American B-52H strategic bomber carried out a training flight in the skies over Finland near the Russian border, according to the Finnish Air Force's X social media account. The statement notes that the exercises took place on Wednesday, November 12th. The US B-52H strategic bomber practiced striking targets at a training ground located in the east of the country, near the Russian border. According to Finnish sources, the American bomber was escorted by Finnish F/A-18 Hornet fighter jets. In addition, the bomber later entered Estonian airspace and approached the Russian border to a distance of about 50 kilometers. In Estonia, the American bomber was escorted by Royal Air Force Eurofighter Typhoons from the United Kingdom. Also, during the training flight over Estonia, a NATO airborne early warning and control aircraft was operating in the area. It is noteworthy that recently the US Air Force Command in Europe reported that a group of B-52s had arrived at Moron Air Base in Spain. It was noted that the goal would be to conduct multilateral exercises together with Finland, Lithuania, Sweden and other allies and partners. The aircraft were to practice operations under high threat conditions. Earlier, it was reported that in California, USA, a B-55 bomber was spotted in the sky carrying a cruise missile that resembles the new low-observable nuclear cruise missile AGM for the U.S. Armed Forces. The U.S. Space Force also reported conducting tests of the Minuteman III intercontinental missile. This is a solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile that the U.S. has had in service since 1970. Its range is 9,500 kilometers. This missile is considered a key element of the U.S. national defense. Because of the videos showing Russians entering Pokrovsk, there was an uproar in the Z channels. Some Russian bloggers are saying that because these videos were published, the attempt was thwarted and the column was destroyed.
Now to the point. Because of some idiot who filmed this and leaked it online, today there are piles of dead and burned out equipment there.
At the same time, Putin's soldiers are fleeing the front more and more often. This was reported by a captain of the Russian army who deserted from the so-called special military operation to journalists from the Khodorkovsky Live project. He also spoke about resettings, extortion, alcoholism and drug addiction among Putin's troops, as well as other horrors in the army.
Several people from our unit died during training. The nurses walk around. In the evening, some of them turn into geishas. Our officers would just shoot. If someone didn't give the pin code, he would shoot him.
According to him, only riffraff are fighting in Ukraine, criminals and people with addictions.
It's already clear that people are simply being sent into a meat grinder.
Putin continues to throw people into the furnace of war. In grueling battles, Russian forces are trying to isolate and encircle Hulyapol in the Zaporizhzhia region. They are using infiltration tactics and striking supply routes, according to the Institute for the Study of War. At the same time, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived at the front in the Zaporizhzhia region, in the Oryol direction, in great detail.
We discussed today with the commanders what is needed to strengthen our positions and how to provide more forces in this direction. It's an important direction. I am grateful for the complete information about the specific difficulties here in the Zaporizhzhia region.
He visited the command post of the 65th Separate Mechanized Brigade Veliki Lu, which, as part of the 17th Corps, is holding the defense in this direction, as well as the soldiers of the 128th Separate Mountain Assault Brigade who are defending Stepnohirsk. A Russian Su-30 military aircraft has crashed. Both crew members were killed. The plane crash occurred on Thursday, November 13th, near Petrozavodsk in the Prionezhsky district of the Republic of Karelia. Monitoring channels and Russian media initially published two versions regarding which aircraft had crashed, naming either the Su-30 or the Su-27. Later, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed the incident, clarifying that it was a Su-30 involved in the accident. Enemy telegram channels Fighter Bomber and 112 reported that it was a Su-30SM, a two-seat heavy fourth-generation fighter jet. The press service of the Ministry of Defense of the aggressor state made a statement.
At around 7 p.m. in the Republic of Karelia, a Su-30 aircraft crashed while performing a scheduled training flight. The plane went down in an uninhabited area. The flight was carried out without any ammunition on board. The crew of the aircraft was killed.
Earlier on November 7th, a Ka-Tu-26 helicopter crashed in the village of Achisu, Dagestan, Russia. The aircraft crashed into a pier, then lost control, hit a residential building during the fall, and caught fire. Russian Su aircraft easily shoot down Ukrainian combat drones. Some of them are setting world records. For example, in May, for the first time in the world, the main intelligence directorate, CHUAR, destroyed an enemy combat aircraft with a strike from a Magura Sea drone, as reported by the agency at the time. Of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine on its Telegram channel, the destruction of the Russian Su-30 combat aircraft was carried out over the Black Sea, the agency specified, noting that this was the first time in the world a combat aircraft was destroyed by a sea drone, specifically with an R-73 air-to-air missile equipped with an infrared homing sensor. A Russian multi-role fighter jet with an estimated cost of about $50 million burst into flames in the air and fell into the sea. In Novorossiysk, drones attacked Russia's Syrskyi's oil export terminal during the night of November 14. As a result of the massive UAV attack, an oil depot at the transshipment complex and several coastal facilities were damaged, according to the operational headquarters of Krasnodar Krai. A large fire broke out after the strike. Syrskyi's is a major oil export terminal and serves as the endpoint of the Transneft company's pipelines. According to the Telegram channel Crimean Wind, in Novorossiysk, a missile may have hit the S-300 Mars-400 position located on the grounds of Military Unit 1537, the Kuban Red Army Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment. There are also reports of a strike on a Kaliber missile warehouse. In addition, sources from the channel report a hit on the Chernomor Transneft oil terminal. The Russian city of Saratov was also under drone attack. Local residents wrote that the local oil refinery was attacked. Earlier, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated, "They need to know where the bomb shelters are," Zelensky said about Kremlin officials. "They need this if they don't stop the war." The Russian Ministry of Defense reported that overnight from November 14th, air defense shot down 216 drones, including 66 over the Krasnodar region, 45 over the Saratov region, and 19 over the temporarily occupied Crimea. On the night of November 14th, Russia launched a massive drone and missile attack on Kyiv and the surrounding region. 30 apartment buildings in 9 districts were damaged.
It got into the smoke.
According to the city's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, as of 11 in the morning, 4 people were reported dead and 29 injured as a result of the overnight attack. Among the injured are 2 children, aged 7 and 10. The occupiers mainly targeted energy facilities in Kyiv and the region. In the capital, there were strikes on residential buildings in the Podilsky, Dniprovsky, Desnyansky, Sviatoshinsky and Obolonsky districts. In the Darnitsky district, debris fell on the grounds of a hospital, and in the Holosiyivsky district, it landed near a kindergarten. In Kyiv, debris from an Iskander missile also damaged the building of the Azerbaijani embassy. Additionally, on the morning of November 14th, the enemy launched a Zircon hypersonic missile from occupied Crimea at Sumy. The Pokrovsk direction remains the main axis of the Russian offensive. This was reported by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrskyi, in a briefing on the situation at the front. According to him, special attention is being paid to reinforcing units in this direction, providing our soldiers with everything they need, as well as strengthening logistical routes. In Pokrovsk and its surroundings, Ukrainian defenders from mechanized military units, brigades and airborne assault forces are operating effectively. Units of the 425th Separate Assault Regiment, operators of unmanned systems and other soldiers from the Ukrainian Defense Forces are also involved. According to Syrskyi, operations are also ongoing in the Ocheretin direction, which forces the enemy to spread out their forces and prevents them from concentrating their main efforts in the Pokrovsk area. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are carrying out measures to block and deliver comprehensive fire strikes against the occupiers near the settlements of Yablochne, Vesely and Sladko. Ukrainian Special Operations Forces destroyed a concentration point of personnel from Russia's 51st Army in the settlement of Uyut in Donetsk region. The task assigned to the 51st Army groupings of Russia was to encircle the northern Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad agglomeration. At the same time, the aggressor country's army continues to put pressure on Ukrainian positions in the Pokrovsk direction using small assault groups and armored vehicles. The Russians are trying to capture Pokrovsk and place Myrnohrad under operational encirclement, resorting to various tactics to achieve this. In particular, among the prohibited tactics, the Russians disguise themselves as civilians and as Ukrainian armed forces soldiers. The National Guard claims that Ukrainian forces are holding their positions in Pokrovsk because if the city falls, the Russians will be able to reach the administrative borders of Donetsk region. At the same time, the defense forces are having success in the Kupiansk direction, particularly in Kupiansk itself in the Kharkiv region. As noted, both Ukrainian soldiers and Russian occupiers used various tactics to infiltrate the city. In particular, sabotage and reconnaissance groups entered, disguising themselves in civilian clothing. However, the enemy was unable to gain a foothold in Kupiansk.
The recent visit of Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev to Moscow has become the focus of media attention. It is notable because this was the Kazakh leader's first state visit to the Russian capital. Previous trips had only official or working status. As the media reports, Tokayev did not meet with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin by chance after his visit to Washington. It is noted that in this way, he demonstrated to the Kremlin's master the previous friendly ties. In addition, the president of Kazakhstan may have conveyed some messages from the American leader Donald Trump to Moscow. In particular, Kazakhstani media paid attention to the details of Tokayev's trip. It is noted that his plane was escorted by Su-35 fighter jets all the way to Moscow. And during the motorcade, there were flags of Kazakhstan and Russia along the entire route, as well as huge banners welcoming Tokayev. At the same time, during his meeting with the Russian dictator, Tokayev was rather reserved. The reason for this could have been the information attacks by Russian media related to the outcome of Tokayev's meeting with US President Donald Trump. On the eve of his visit to Moscow, pro-Kremlin media published negative statements about Tokayev. This was due to the agreement signed allowing American companies to develop tungsten deposits in Kazakhstan, as well as Tokayev's positive assessment of Trump's activities. Despite this, following the negotiations in Moscow on November 12th, a declaration was signed to elevate the relationship between Kazakhstan and Russia to the level of comprehensive strategic partnership and alliance to support the high pace of political contacts at all levels, and for Russia to fully fulfill its commitments regarding the construction of the first nuclear power plant in Kazakhstan and the development of cooperation at Baikonur. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev also maintains friendly relations with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. During his visit to Beijing in September of this year, he stated that China is a reliable neighbor destined by fate. According to him, Kazakhstan and China have built strong and dynamic business relations. The world's largest American aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, is approaching the shores of Venezuela. According to the Associated Press, it will arrive in Venezuelan waters in the coming days. It is noted that it is still unknown whether American military aircraft will bomb targets inside Venezuela to further pressure dictator Nicolás Maduro to step down. As reported by CBC News, the Pentagon has presented US President Donald Trump with options for operations against Venezuela, including strikes on ground targets. At the same time, the very presence of this powerful warship in the Caribbean Sea is already a clear enough signal. In addition, the head of the U.S. Department of Defense, Pete Hegseth, announced that the U.S. is launching an operation called Southern Spear, aimed at drug cartels in the Western Hemisphere. The announcement was made against the backdrop of escalating tensions between the U.S. and the Venezuelan authorities, as well as U.S. military strikes on ships in the Caribbean Sea that are allegedly linked to drug trafficking. Meanwhile, amid the arrival of the largest U.S. aircraft carrier in the region, Venezuela has announced a mass mobilization, according to CNN. Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez stated that the air, land, naval and reserve forces will conduct exercises aimed at optimizing command, control and communications, as well as ensuring the country's defense. The publication writes, "In Caracas, it is believed that the U.S. wants regime change in Venezuela." Some members of U.S. President Donald Trump's administration admit that their actions are aimed at removing President Nicolás Maduro. According to CNN, there are currently about 15,000 American troops in the region. A representative of the Russian Ministry of Defense, commander of the Chechen Special Forces Unit Akhmat, Alaudinov, threatened Z bloggers with large-scale repression. On his Telegram channel, he published a video address in which he called Russian war correspondents who criticized the army's actions enemies of Russia. In particular, this refers to publications that exposed the colossal losses of Russian troops in Pokrovsk, Ukraine. Alaudinov announced that materials against them would soon be massively submitted to law enforcement agencies.
They have started to gradually receive protocols for discrediting. Then the materials have already been sent directly on extremism charges. Well, very soon this machine will pick up such momentum that, of course, they'll all be stunned.
Alaudinov noted that those targeted by the campaign were given 7 days to remove all the dirt from their channels and apologize for what they had already written. According to him, quote, "Those who do not comply will be destroyed within the legal framework through criminal prosecution so that each of them gets what they deserve." The head of Akhmat added that Z bloggers who want to avoid responsibility have already started reaching out to him. It should be noted that the commander of Kadyrov's Special Forces Unit, Akhmat, Alaudinov, often becomes the subject of ridicule because of his statements about the situation on the battlefield, which do not correspond to reality. The situation with the repressions against Z bloggers was commented on by political strategist Boris Tsizenghausen on his YouTube channel.
According to him, Russian troops put up a fierce fight in Pokrovsk. But the enemies of Russia, as he calls the Z bloggers who doubted that anyone put up a fight there, are working inside the country. Alaudinov said, "We will terrorize all of you."
Tsizenghausen concluded that processes have already begun inside Russia where their own are devouring their own. According to him, this is only the beginning.